And the bottom line here is if you can figure out what you are doing, not your practice, not the healthcare system, not your colleague, but what you specifically are doing to contribute to your own burnout, that is a problem that you can start to solve. Welcome to The PA is In, the show created by PAs for PAs, where codependency with your supervising physician is a thing of the past, optimal team practice is the future, and physician associate has taken the place of physician assistant as the professional title of choice. I'm Tracy Bingaman, and I'm obsessed with redefining what success as a PA looks like and what it feels like. Here you'll find the mindset shifts, systems, and processes I use to escape healthcare burnout and integrate my work into my life. Work-life balance is a myth, and an integrated life where you thrive professionally, not a balancing act, is the goal here. My mission is to help you to grow into a unicorn PA who loves their job, has abundant energy, time to spare, and work-optional financial freedom. The PA is in. Welcome to another episode of The PA is In, the show created by and for PAs who are ready to redefine success, break free from burnout, and build a career that supports their life, not the other way around. I'm your host, Tracy Bingaman. I'm a PA, a clinical career coach, a negotiation advisor, and I'm your guide to finding and creating sustainability in life while working in medicine. So today we're going to talk about taking ownership of the role that we play in contributing to our own professional burnout. I was recently asked to be a guest on another show, another podcast hosted by a wonderful PA. If you haven't found it, check out A Beautiful PA Life by Rachel LaCosta. I was a guest on episode number 7. It is titled From Resigning to Thriving. And as a part of that conversation, I was talking to Rachel about my experience with burnout. And I realized that as a part of that discussion, so many of my sentences were phrased in this reactive victim mentality, that I was talking about the healthcare system and how I was victimized by it and how its demands were unreasonable, its growth was unsustainable, the things that were being asked of me were unreasonable. And I realized that that's not really the tone or the way that I want to tell this narrative about burnout. So today is about taking ownership. As providers, we're often focused on helping others and this system that we're sort of working within. And as a part of that, it can feel easy to overlook our own decisions, the things that we're doing, the things that we actually have ownership of, things like boundaries or lack thereof. And that can lead us to feeling overwhelmed and exhausted and like those hallmark symptoms of burnout. So inside of this episode, I'm going to share a list of specific things that I did that I feel contributed towards leading down the path of burnout. Now, as with many things in medicine, I think that burnout is multifactorial. And I do think the job, the network, the demands of the healthcare system, my patients, all of those things contributed to my burnout. But what I want to do is say, hey, here are things that I did or didn't do well or ignored or could have done better in recognizing these specific actions. Because I want you to potentially see and resonate with things that you can change as your life. This is not to say like I want this episode to feel like it's berating you if any of these things are resonating with you and you're saying, oh, I do that, or I see that reflected in myself or some of my colleagues. But rather, if some of these things that I'm saying, hey, here are the warning signs, here are the yellow flags, here are the red flags that led me down the path to burnout, that is something that you can potentially change sooner. So one, I want you to listen and say, hey, am I doing these things? And do I think it's contributing to making me feel burned out? And two, what steps can I take to change these things or improve this aspect of my life or of my career? My hope is that by sharing my experience with burnouts and the things that I did and I'm taking ownership of, is that you will feel empowered to take back the control of your life and your career, no matter where you are on that spectrum from burnout to sustainability while working in medicine. All right, let's get started. Dreading one more shift, one more day, seeing one more patient. What if that dread isn't simply anxiety and fear, but rather the bubbling up of underlying resentment that you are underpaid, disrespected, marginalized, overwhelmed, and your schedule, quite frankly, sucks? I'm a clinician negotiation coach, and I help providers like you to land the biggest raises of their career. It's super simple. Here's how it works. You book your 1 hour call in which we discuss your current compensation, what your specific goals are, and create a personalized plan. You'll hang out with a strategic plan for how to land a bigger paycheck, a better schedule, and blocked admin time. Life is too short to constantly feel that resentment, to be insulted by your pay, and to continue to have that crappy schedule. A negotiation consultation will help you to understand your value, feel confident about the conversations you need to have, and have the gumption to finally earn what you are worth. I have dedicated slots on my calendar for negotiation calls each week. Would you like one of those calls to be yours? The link in the show notes is the fastest way to get that booked. So I have in my hand a handwritten list of things that I did to contribute to my own burnout. There's something so humbling about walking on a journey with people who are in a place that you were once. So I do one-on-one coaching with clinicians that are feeling burned out, and I know what it feels like to be there and to be so discouraged and disappointed, and like what you expected working in medicine to be like is not what it actually is like for you as a part of your clinical practice. The first thing that I feel like I didn't do well as a part of this journey through medicine and that contributed to my burnout is that I was not an effective advocate. I would like to say that I did raise my hand towards the end and start to probably complain as opposed to advocate, and that my complaints were not effective, um, and that I wasn't a great advocate for my patients, for myself, or for the group that I worked for. And I think the reason for that is by the time that I started to take action on advocating for some of these things that I was saying, hey, I don't think this is safe or reasonable for providers, I don't think this is providing the best care for patients, was that I was so emotional and also so emotionally exhausted that those arguments were just that. They were argumentative as opposed to me strategically presenting a case or advocating for why a certain call rotation, a certain way that we were managing inpatient coverage was not effective for patients. I also feel like I wasn't great at charting efficiently, and that as my work grew, I did not adapt the necessary skills to keep up with that increased burden. We had a lot of tertiary care centers or a lot of like community ERs that were suddenly referring a lot more patients, or that we were triaging those patients. And so a lot of that is work that it would be a phone note because I talked to the provider. It would be arranging some logistics for outpatient follow up for these patients that didn't need inpatient transfer. And that I didn't have a good system for keeping up with that. Pretty good about like notes and consults and discharges because those had to be done in order for patients to leave the hospital. Those had to be done. But when it came to documenting stuff on call in terms of phone calls and stuff from peripheral ERs, I felt like I didn't have a good system for keeping up with that. And then I felt overwhelmed by the charting or that administrative burden. The next thing that I did poorly was that I was not willing to fail so that it became obvious that what we were doing wasn't working. So, when the network was expanding and growing, when my job was being more demanding than ever, when I had more patients than ever, when the volumes were increasing, I was not willing to fail to show the people in the positions to make decisions relative to the system we were using that it wasn't working. And I was complaining to one of my surgeons about this one time, and he said, sometimes you have to let it break before they're willing to fix it. And I have never forgotten that because every time I would ask for help or say, hey, we're really overwhelmed, we can't get this work done, they would point to the evidence, which was, you can get this work done because you have been getting this work done because the work is done and the patients are cared for. Therefore, your argument that the system isn't working isn't effective. And that's such a hard position to be in because you feel like if you don't do the work, the patients suffer. It's not the patient's fault that we suddenly are inundated with, more consults or more transfers or those things that we're dealing with. So I wasn't willing to leave things undone because I felt like it wasn't the right thing for patients. I also didn't track it well. So I think at the time I was like, wow, I'm so overwhelmed. but it didn't say, I used to be seeing 12 patients a day inpatient. Now I'm seeing 20. I didn't have data. I didn't pull reports. I was mainly making those arguments based on feeling overwhelmed, based on feeling like the demand had increased, as opposed to coming to the team and saying, hey, even though the census hasn't grown since, 6 months ago, here's what we're seeing in terms of volumes from calls and transfers from peripheral ERs. This is becoming enough that we need a second person to handle this, or we need someone triaging across the network, or we need a better system with the, transfer center. So I don't think that I gathered enough data, and I made arguments based on how I felt. And that's not to discount the feelings, because feelings matter. And I was definitely feeling like it was more, but to make a case based on evidence, right? We like evidence-based medicine, evidence-based argument, right? Saying, hey, this used to be this, and this was sustainable and reasonable, and patients were getting what they needed, and providers were safe. However, now we're over here. Here's what the volumes look like. Here's what the tracking looks like. This is why. And I think that piece of this is why we need this thing is so important, as opposed to I feel like I need it. I feel overwhelmed. I feel burdened, versus here is the burden. Here is the actual data when it comes to those things. And I think personally, as someone who identifies as type A, who is an achiever, that leaving those things undone was very hard for me. And proving to them that I was overwhelmed and needing help felt nearly impossible, because that would mean that I would have to leave things undone, and that didn't sit well with me. So instead of saying, I couldn't get to this, whoever's on call can handle it, it can wait till tomorrow. There may be an unhappy patient, there may be an unhappy surgeon, is that I would do it with resentment, and then that would build over time so that I felt more and more resentful. And that resentment led to complaining. I feel like this list is just flowing into just a very, I'm just sort of telling you. So the next thing on my list is I complained to the wrong person. Have you ever done this where you know that something is wrong and isn't working and isn't reasonable, and you complain to the person who's convenient, who is nearby, who is sympathetic, because we all like sympathy when we're complaining about something, but you're not complaining to the person who can actually fix the thing. I did this so often in group text messages, in ranting voice texts, in calls, in face to face discussions with colleagues, where I was like, this is terrible. Can you believe this? Like, this is so unreasonable. And they would be like, no, I can't believe it. It is so unreasonable. And then neither of us could fix it because we weren't in a position of leadership. And even more so, we weren't having the conversation with the person who could fix it. So instead of saying like, hey, I was on call and this thing happened, and this is we need a system, or we need to clarify the flow of this, I would just be resentful, be angry, complain to the wrong person, and then the next time I was on call it happened again. Nothing had changed. And so I mean, I do think there's something cathartic about saying that you feel upset about something, about saying that something is wrong, and connecting with those colleagues who get it, who are in a similar position. But if it's recurrent and it's occurring again and again, talk to someone who can do something about it. Start to document that. Start to gather a consensus. Like if there's other people that this is happening to, that's the other thing, is that I feel like I would complain to other people, but then I still felt alone, that I didn't sort of say to them, hey, if we really think this is a problem, let's send an email. Like, and I'll CC you and we'll meet and we'll talk about it. You can tell me and this other person that you've had this experience too. And all of that didn't really happen. Like, I feel like I was resentful and I was complaining and I was spinning my wheels, which led to more resentment and really wasn't good for morale in terms of our group or our culture, that we were collectively complaining about something that we weren't doing anything in order to fix. the problem. The next thing on my list is that I kept volunteering for stuff even when I was drowning. So, even when I was in a period of being burned out and not sleeping and feeling exhausted and having insomnia and all these other things that were happening to me medically, I would still raise my hand to volunteer for bringing in food for a potluck, for taking an extra call shift for someone who needed it, for running an extra report, for staying late, for doing some of these things. So I felt like I was drowning and at or over capacity. And for some reason, I didn't acknowledge that volunteering for more and more things was not the solution. And that saying no to those things was a vital part of me getting out alive or even just being able to sustain this position for longer than the next day. I kept volunteering and I kept raising my hand. And at one point, Dan was like, "Why are you doing this? Why are you sending out the sign out email? Why are you doing these things?" And I don't know that I have a really great reason why, but if you're feeling overwhelmed and you feel like you have way too much work to do, consider saying no or just not volunteering. Or if someone tries to volunteer you to do things, if it's something that has to be done, ask them what they're going to take off your plate or how they're going to compensate you for the time and energy that it takes to do that task. That is something that historically we're not very good at because we are used to triaging and just taking things on our plate. So if you are drowning, stop volunteering for things. And better yet, see what you could take off your plate for one or two less things for you to do. PAs, you're dedicated to improving the lives and health of your patients for a brighter future. But what about your future? Who's dedicated to helping you with your financial health so that you can live the future you dream of? Meet Caleb Pepperday, certified financial planner and owner of Advanced Practice Planning. Caleb is the husband of a PAC himself and has seen firsthand the challenges PAs face when it comes to finances. This fueled his mission to ensure that physician assistants get the respect, guidance, and treatment they deserve to build the future they want. Don't risk facing retirement with too little in your accounts or giving up on your dreams for the future, and work with an advisor who understands the unique challenges of being a PA. Gain insights into what your retirement could look like with access to the proper guidance. As a listener of and a featured guest on this podcast, Caleb's made available a free guide to help you prepare for retirement. Check out the link in the show notes to get your free guide and learn more about how advanced practice planning can help secure your financial future. The next thing on my list is that I was constantly connected to work. There was a season of time where I wasn't utilizing Do Not Disturb and Tiger Text, where I had my Outlook email on my phone with notifications, where I was sleeping with my phone at the bedside, even on nights when I wasn't on call, where I would check the reply all emails throughout the night. We used to send out a sign out email in the evening. And then throughout the night, if there were cases, the surgeons would send an email updating the cases and let people know, who's admitted where and what happened with people. But they would sometimes reply at 2 a.m. because they were up stenting a 6 stone or something. And then I would check it and my brain would activate and I would no longer be able to sleep because then I would start thinking about work. And there was this constant connection where I was either technologically connected to work or even just like mentally, emotionally keyed up like I was working. And that's necessary when you're on call. And that's honestly sometimes necessary when you're at work. But I really think that I didn't have a system for letting it go. I didn't have a system for turning off work and stepping into my personal, and that was problematic and contributing to my burnout. The next thing on my list is that I ignored my body's whispers. So if you've been around, you know that when I was burned out, I was mentally and emotionally burned out, but I was also physically sick in terms of recurrent pneumonia and tachycardia of unknown origin and severe autoimmune hyperthyroidism. And that those things were the end result of fatigue and exhaustion and insomnia and not taking care of myself and not prioritizing my own health and wellness. And that there were things that my body was saying like, hey, please slow down and do less. Hey, please slow down and do less. If you could please slow down and let us recover and rest, that would be great. And those whispers that I ignored eventually became shouts that I couldn't ignore because I physically couldn't operate with a heart rate of 180 to 200 when I was standing at the bedside for a not exciting prostatectomy. And that there are things that my body was trying to tell me, that when my mind was trying to tell me, that I was too busy, too distracted, that were not a priority for me, that I ignored. And I think if I had listened, I would have probably burned out, honestly. I would have burned out, but I wouldn't have crashed and burned so much physically during the time when I was crashing and burning mentally and emotionally. And I think all of those things are intertwined, and there's a Venn diagram of all of those different aspects, and burnout is in the middle. And that's where I was with those overlapping sort of qualms. And the last thing, which always hurts my heart a little to share about, is that I neglected myself and my health and my wellness and my relationships with others when I was going through burnout. And I think that was a little bit of a survival mechanism, that I barely had enough energy and focus and presence to be there. But also that I knew that I needed to be on at work, which meant that I wasn't on and wasn't focused and wasn't present for my husband and my kids and my friendships and my own self-care and wellness at the time when I was walking through burnout. I realize that some of this sounds very depressing, that I did all of these things, quote unquote, wrong when I was going through burnout. But the hopeful thing is that many of these things are no longer a problem for me. And the bottom line here is, if you can figure out what you are doing, not your practice, not the healthcare system, not your colleague, but what you specifically are doing to contribute to your own burnout, that is a problem that you can start to solve. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to another episode of The PA is In. If this episode resonated with you or made you feel a little called out, if you're recognizing some of your own choices or lack of boundaries that may be contributing to your burnout, know that you, my friend, are not alone. And more importantly, you can change things. And identifying the things that you specifically are doing, it hurts a little, but it also gives you a target for something that you can fix. Remember, taking ownership of your own role in burnout doesn't mean that you're constantly blaming and berating yourself and giving yourself a hard time. But rather, it's about recognizing where you have the power to make adjustments to protect your energy, to set better boundaries, and to do as I say now, and not as I did then, to prioritize your own health and well-being. If you found this episode helpful, I would love it if you would consider sharing it with a colleague and saying, hey, I find myself doing this thing where I'm constantly connected to work. How about you? Don't forget to subscribe so that you never miss a future episode. You can connect with me on social media. I've been spending a lot of time on LinkedIn lately. Until next time, keep strategically advocating for yourself and your patients and your team, because your health and your happiness matter. That's all for today. This PA is out. Congratulations, you've just joined an awesome club. By listening to a full episode of The PA is In, you are officially on the Unicorn PA team. Welcome aboard. What most team members do is they subscribe to the podcast, because that allows them to automatically get the latest episode of the show. The life of your dreams exists on the other side of taking action. Keep making small shifts and keep getting better. Your life will improve, your career will soar, and you will have the confidence you need to create your own success. I will see you in the next episode. This PA is out.